much of it is even worse than trash. Having said that, though, I still believe that the commanding heights, if you like, of mainstream economy, whether it's the New York Times, CBC, BBC, PBS, NPR, these are decent, reliable, coherent forces which are generating incredibly valuable information. They are what binds us together. They are what creates a civic culture. They are what allows us to become citizens. Good journalists aren't necessarily good citizens. Good citizens aren't necessarily good journalists. Citizenship and journalism have nothing to do with one another. But to have good citizens, we need well-informed people. So I don't blame all of the demise of mainstream media on the internet. The causal relationship is complex. Much of the decline of mainstream media is independent. People stopped reading newspapers before the internet. You can't simply blame the internet on the fact that people are stealing $20 billion worth of records every year. It's more complicated than that. I also acknowledge the fact that mainstream media is itself fallen under the same spell as the internet. The cult of the amateur is what is ruining mainstream media. Mainstream media needs to be more authoritative, more arrogant. So the worst things about mainstream media, reality television, call-in radio, popularity contests like American Idol, those are the things which also I'm not sympathetic to. They're one stop behind the internet. So I am not saying that mainstream media is all good, and I am not saying that one can blame purely the demise of mainstream media on the internet. But if you put these two things together, I still think that we have to, if we're to be reliable, if we're going to be responsible citizens, if we're going to create a media for the YouTube generation, for the kids growing up on this media, who don't understand that Wikipedia isn't properly edited, who don't understand the difference between Google News and the New York Times, who don't understand that there's a difference aesthetically between the stuff they watch on YouTube and something by Truffaut or Hitchcock or Scorsese. We have a responsibility to pass on a higher quality of the media than that. So having said all that, I'm sure you'll have some questions. How long more do I have? 5 more minutes. I've already made, I'm sure, a fool of myself, but I'll make an even bigger fool of myself by talking a little bit about advertising. And I don't know that much about it, and you will know a lot more than me. So I'm a true amateur here. I'm generally an amateur, but I'm particularly amateurish when it comes to advertising. I've made the argument in other environments that I don't think that the Web 2.0 revolution is good for the advertising business. Some of you may be growing rich on it. Some of you may be very happy to tell your clients that they should all be blogging and creating social networks. Some of you, God forbid, may even be happy to embellish your clients' coverage on Wikipedia or the reviews of their books on Amazon. But in my view, the collapsing of media is a bad thing for the advertising business, because you guys are as critical in terms of gatekeepers as the editors, the publishers, the A&R guys, and everyone else in media. When you do away with the middleman, which is what Web 2.0 is all about, particularly according to their utopian ideologies, when you do away with the middleman, then the advertising experts, the people who manage the advertising ecosystem also go away. You see this on lots of fronts in the advertising business. You see it in the rise of user-generated advertising, which in my view is a profound fraud. It's stealing from everyone and resulting in layoffs in the advertising business. In my view, what the collapse of media is doing is bringing out the worst in many of you, the worst in organizations like Edelman, who seem to be using it in a very slippery way. It allows, it even encourages everyone to be dishonest. When you do away with gatekeepers, then you can post the most wonderful things about your clients and the most critical things about their competition, and no one is going to catch you. You need gatekeepers. You need gatekeepers in advertising to keep everyone honest. The final thing about advertising, which in my view is the most troubling of all, is that this whole economy rests on advertising. This whole economy rests on the revenue being brought to companies like Google and YouTube by advertising, because in this free media, no one's willing to fork over cash for anything anymore. So the only possible way this media is going to survive is when people pay for advertising. The problem, though, with this movement, particularly in its most idealistic form, is it's against advertising. The cult, the real cult of Web 2.0 is the cult of the authentic. I loathe authenticity. I'm the most inauthentic person, hopefully, in the room. The notion of authenticity is absurd. It's dangerous and it's destructive, particularly if you're in the advertising business, because advertising, by definition, is inauthentic. It's dishonest. You're getting other people to buy something, right? You're not your friend. You're selling them something. Now, the problem with the cult of authenticity, which is bound up, particularly, I think, in the hippie ethic and in the communitarianism of much of Web 2.0, is it rejects the very notion of advertising. It rejects the very notion of the commercial. So it's no coincidence, in terms of the Web 2.0 revolution, is that you have that cult of authenticity going together with new kinds of technology like the TiVo machine, which allows people to skip advertising. The end result of this, ironically, is not less advertising, but more advertising. As you have a media which is evolving in Web 2.0, a media which is explicitly uncomfortable with formal advertising in terms of the traditional church-state division between advertising that existed in mainstream media. Increasingly, the only way you can have advertising is when content itself is full of advertising, and the real play for advertisers is to dress content up as advertising. It's a cat and mouse game, and I'm sure some of you are more and more skilled and experienced in dressing content up as advertising. The end result, then, of all this, if we're going to have a viable media, professional media, as opposed to just amateurs blogging, which is entirely worthless, and no one paying anything for anyone, the end result of this, in my view, is YouTube. YouTube, which appears on one level to be independent video makers amusing one another, but in truth is actually mainly advertising dressed up as content. The end result, then, of this media, and I'm not sure whether this is, for you guys, whether this is the ultimate wet dream or the ultimate nightmare. Certainly, perhaps it's a combination, or maybe it's the same thing. But the ultimate consequence of this is a YouTube media, just one long commercial break, where everything is advertising. And I asked the boys, and they are boys, young men with earrings and unshaven faces, the boys who founded YouTube about, Hurley and Chen. I asked them about this publicly in San Diego a few weeks ago. I said, aren't you troubled by the fact that on YouTube there's no difference between content and advertising? It all looks like the same thing, and the kids who come on are going to think they're looking at independent content, but are actually looking at advertising. And they looked at me, and they said this publicly, and it was profoundly shocking. They said, we're not bothered, because for us, as long as the kids are enjoying what they see on YouTube, it doesn't matter. Now, in my view, and I'm not in the advertising business, so maybe I can afford to be worried about this, but in my view, I think that we collectively should worry about this. It's fine to have advertising. I'm not against advertising, but when advertising becomes everything, then it becomes nothing. And we're all in trouble, whether we're cultural consumers, old reactionary farts like myself, or guys like you in the advertising business whose livelihood is based on the selling of advertising. So I am worried, and I hope that you will disagree with me strongly.